Chapter 8. Caro can defense, advance variation. We will replay the main line and the important sublines, with pauses for tactics. Welcome back to our Caro can defense series. In chapters 6 and 7, we studied the short setup with knight f3, bishop e2, and early castling. Anand showed how white can stabilize the center and use the c-file, while Viswanathan showed how black can answer with open files, queenside castling, and a favorable endgame. Now we stay in 1992, but we move to a sharper branch. Timman chooses knight c3 and then g4, immediately asking the bishop on f5 where it wants to go. This is a different kind of advanced Caro can lesson. White is not quietly building. White is grabbing space, chasing the bishop, and trying to turn the king side into a battlefield. Anand's answer is instructive. He does not only run away with the bishop. He counterattacks the center with f6, uses e5 to break white's pawn chain, trades queens when the attack has been slowed, and reaches an active endgame where black has no real danger. Your job in this lesson is to learn the defensive rhythm against the g-pawn advance, retreat only as much as needed, hit the center quickly, welcome queen trades when they reduce white's attack, and keep the pieces active enough that white's space cannot become a lasting initiative. e4, c6. Anand chooses the Caro can. For our timeline, this is important. Anand was already using the advance variation from both sides. That gives us a useful practical view. The same player who pressed with white also trusted black's resources in the sharpest structures. d4, d5. Black challenges the center immediately. e5. Timman chooses the advance variation. White gains space and fixes the central pawn chain. The question is whether the extra space will become an attack, or whether black will break it down with timely pawn breaks. Bishop f5. Black develops the light-squared bishop before playing e6. This is the Caro can signature. Black solves the c8 bishop problem first, then asks white how much time he wants to spend chasing it. Knight c3. White chooses a more combative move than the short setup. The knight supports e4 and d5, and white keeps the option of expanding with g4. This is a direct signal that the game may become sharper than the earlier b2 systems. e6. Black builds the usual solid center. The bishop is already outside the pawn chain, so black can now support d5 and prepare counterplay. g4. Timman immediately attacks the bishop. This is the key branch for the lesson. White gains space and tempo, but the g-pawn also weakens squares and commits the king side before white has castled. Bishop g6. Anand retreats to g6. Black keeps the bishop alive on the long diagonal. The retreat is calm, but black must not become passive. The next move shows the point. Knight on the g-file to e2. White develops flexibly. The knight supports f4 and g3 ideas, and white prepares to increase pressure without blocking the f-pawn. f6. Anand hits the center at once. This is the main lesson. Against a wing pawn storm, black should look for central counterplay. If white spends time chasing the bishop, black attacks the base of white's space advantage. Knight f4. Timman develops with tempo. The knight attacks the bishop on g6 and increases the pressure. White wants to prove that black's bishop retreat has created a target. Bishop f7. The bishop steps back again. This looks modest, but it keeps the bishop on the board and lets black continue the central fight. Black is saying, the bishop can move, the center cannot be ignored. Queen e2. White protects e5 and keeps tactical pressure. The queen also hints at queenside castling, so black must be accurate. F takes e5. Anand captures in the center. Black removes the advanced pawn and opens lines before white completes development. This is exactly how black should react when white has pushed flank pawns early. Queen takes e5. White recaptures with the queen. The queen becomes active, but it can also become a target. Black now gains time by developing against it. Knight d7. Black attacks the queen and develops. This is efficient. Caro can play, one move improves a piece, gains tempo, and helps black challenge the central dark squares. Queen e2. White returns the queen to e2. The attack has not disappeared, but white has already spent time with the queen. Black has won the first small argument in the center. Queen e7. Anand supports e5 ideas and prepares to coordinate. The queen also helps black complete development without allowing white an easy attacking target. Knight d3. White reroutes the knight. The knight leaves f4, supports e5 and c5 squares, and opens the f-pawn. White still wants to use the space advantage actively. Bishop g6. The bishop returns to g6. Now the bishop is not simply running away. Black has already induced queen moves and exchanged the e5 pawn, so the bishop can re-enter the active diagonal. h4. Timman renews the kingside attack. White wants h5, and the bishop on g6 is again under pressure. This is the dream of the g-pawn system, keep gaining space and force black's pieces backward. Bishop takes d3. Anand chooses simplification. Instead of retreating forever, black gives up the bishop for the knight. This reduces white's attacking force and leaves white with a queen recapture that can be met by central play. Queen takes d3. White recaptures. White has the bishop pair and space, but black has removed an active knight and is ready to strike again. e5. This is the second major central break. Black challenges d4 and opens the game while white's king is still in the center. In the advance, Caro can, f6 and e5 together are often the answer to an overextended kingside. Bishop g5. White develops with tempo on the queen. Timman keeps the initiative alive. If black drifts, white's bishops and pawns could become dangerous. Queen f7. Anand sidesteps and keeps the queen active. The queen supports the kingside and keeps pressure on the central light squares. Queenside castles. White castles long. Now the strategic picture is sharp. White has kingside space, black has central breaks, and both kings are on opposite sides of the board. Bishop d6. Black develops with purpose. The bishop supports e5, controls h2, and helps black prepare piece exchanges. Anand is not trying to mate white immediately, he is trying to remove the danger and enter an active endgame. D takes e5. White captures in the center. Timman does not want black to keep the strong e-pawn. Knight takes e5. Black recaptures with the knight. Now black has an active central knight, and the queen on f7 helps support the position. Queen e2. White steps back from the central tension. The queen keeps contact with e5 and prepares to decide whether to trade or maintain pressure. Queen f3. Anand offers a queen trade. This is an important defensive technique. When the opponent has pushed kingside pawns to attack, exchanging queens can make those pawns look like weaknesses instead of weapons. Queen takes f3. Timman accepts the trade. White could avoid exchanges, but the black queen on f3 is too active to ignore. Knight takes f3. The queens are gone. Black has achieved a major goal. White still has space, but the direct mating attack has been reduced, and black's knight is active on f3. Bishop e3. White develops and attacks the queenside structure. The bishop also watches a7 and c5 ideas, so black must keep developing actively. Knight h6. Anand repositions the knight. The knight heads toward g4 and f5 squares, and black keeps control over the kingside dark squares. Knight e4. White centralizes the knight. This attacks d6 and c5 ideas, and it tries to prove that white's pieces still have more space. Bishop e5. Black places the bishop actively. The bishop attacks b2 and keeps pressure on the central dark squares. Black's minor pieces are not passive defenders anymore. Knight g5. White attacks the knight and creates tactical threats. Timman is still fighting for the initiative. Knight takes g5. Black removes the active knight. This exchange reduces white's attacking potential and changes the position into a more manageable structure. H takes g5. White recaptures with the h-pawn. White opens the h-file and keeps a kingside pawn mass, but the structure is also loose. Knight takes g4. Anand grabs another pawn and activates the knight. The knight on g4 attacks e3 and f2 ideas, and black begins to challenge white's loose kingside. Bishop d3. White centralizes the bishop and eyes g6. White wants to make the bishop pair count before black consolidates. g6. Black shuts down the bishop's diagonal. This is simple and effective. Anand gives the king shelter and controls f5 and h5 squares. Rook on the d-file to e1. White brings a rook to the open file. Timman wants to use the e-file before black castles. Kingside castles. Black castles safely. Despite all the early pawn pushes, black's king has reached safety. This is the payoff of the queen trade and central exchanges. Bishop c5. White attacks the rook and improves the bishop. The bishop on c5 is active, and white hopes to turn the pair of bishops into pressure. Rook on the f-file to e8. Black moves the rook to the e-file. The rook meets white's pressure directly. Black is ready to trade activity for a stable endgame. Rook h4. White attacks the knight on g4. The rook lift is active and logical. White wants to push the knight back and win time against black's kingside. b6. Anand attacks the bishop. Black does not only defend the knight. He uses a tempo on the bishop to keep white from taking over. Rook takes g4. White wins the knight. This looks promising for white, but the sequence is concrete. Black has prepared counterplay against the bishop and the center. B takes c5. Black captures the bishop. Material stays balanced in practical terms, and the position simplifies further. Black has removed one of white's most active pieces. c3. White stabilizes the center and gives the king luft. The move also prepares to keep black's pieces out of d4. Rook on the a file to b8. Black activates the rook. Anand chooses the open b file, where white's king can feel pressure. King c2. White steps away from the b file pressure. In opposite side castling structures, king safety remains important even after the queens come off. c4. Black advances with tempo. The pawn attacks the bishop on d3 and opens the c5 square. Anand uses pawns to drive white's pieces and improve the rook activity. Bishop takes c4. White captures the c-pawn. Timman accepts the challenge and tries to simplify into a favorable rook ending. D takes c4. Black recaptures. The d-pawn becomes a c-pawn, and the structure opens further. Black's rook and minor pieces stay active enough to hold the balance. Rook on the g-file to e4. White doubles pressure on e5. The rook targets black's bishop and centralizes with tempo. Rook f8. Black attacks f2 and keeps the rook active. Anand does not retreat into passivity. The rook moves to a file where it creates counterplay. Rook takes e5. White captures the bishop. Timman wins a piece, but black's rook activity and pawn structure keep the tactics alive. Rook takes f2, check. Black enters with check. This is the point. White has one material, but black gets active rook play against the king and the second rank. Rook on first rank to e2. White blocks and offers exchanges. When the opponent's rook is active, trading rooks is often the safest path. Rook takes e2, check. Black accepts the exchange. Anand heads for a rook ending where activity and pawn structure should be enough to draw. Rook takes e2. White recaptures. Now the game has transformed completely. The opening attack is gone, and we have a technical rook ending. Rook b5. Black activates the rook behind white's pawns. This is correct rook endgame technique. Stay active, attack pawns from the side or behind, and do not allow the stronger looking side to consolidate. Rook g2. White defends the g-pawn. Timman keeps the king side pawns together and waits for a chance to improve the king. King f7. Black centralizes the king. Once the queens and minor pieces are gone, the king must join the game. Rook g4. White attacks the c4 pawn. White's rook becomes active, so black must avoid passive defense. Rook c5. Black defends actively. The rook protects the pawn while staying on an open file. King d2. White improves the king. Both sides now play normal endgame chess, activate the king, improve the rook, and test pawn weaknesses. King e6. Black's king moves toward the center. Anand is close enough to defend the pawn structure and restrict white's king. King e3. White also centralizes. The kings are now active, and neither side has a direct breakthrough. Rook e5, check. Black checks from the active file. The rook keeps white's king from settling comfortably. King d4. White advances the king. Timman tries to win the c4 pawn and create winning chances. Rook e2. Black counterattacks. Instead of passively holding c4, Anand attacks b2 and keeps the rook active. King takes c4. White wins the c4 pawn. White has made progress, but the rook ending remains balanced because black's rook is active and white's queenside pawns are loose. Rook takes b2. Black immediately wins b2. This is why activity matters more than one pawn. Black restores material balance and keeps the white king busy. a4. White creates a passed pawn possibility. Timman tries one last practical test on the queen side. King f5. Black attacks the rook and improves the king. The king heads toward the kingside pawns, and white cannot build a winning setup. Rook g1. This game gives us the next black side lesson in the advanced Caro timeline. Against knight c3 and g4, black should not think only about saving the bishop. The real question is how to challenge white's center before the kingside pawns become dangerous. Anand's plan was practical and modern: play f6, exchange the advanced e-pawn, use e5 to open the center, trade queens when white's attack depends on queen pressure, and keep enough activity to draw the endgame comfortably. So the chapter takeaway is simple: when white attacks on the wing, black's best defense is often central counterplay plus timely simplification. As we saw in this lesson, Anand answered Timman's g-pawn advance with central counterplay. Play f6 against e5, use e5 against d4, trade queens when the attack depends on queen pressure, and keep active rook play in the endgame. The key lesson is to meet wing expansion by breaking the center.